Good morning. For those who do not know me, my name is Meggie. I'm 22 years old. In this instance, I find my age to be distinctly relevant. In 22 years, I have managed to learn quite a bit. Of course, I have a lot more to go, because 22 years on this earth isn't a whole lot. Luckily, there's another way to learn about strength, resilience, and change. I find storytelling to be the most useful, because stories are told for three main reasons: to entertain, to teach, and to inspire. Today is an occasion to do all three in 10 short minutes. I have two stories that I'd like to share with you today. Once upon a time, an expectant set of parents went to the doctors for a routine checkup on their unborn baby girl. The two already had 3 children, and the father was excited for a fourth. The mother hoped this would be the last one. Unfortunately, the doctor had sad, difficult news for the parents. They had found evidence that the daughter would be born with Turner syndrome and recommended that the pregnancy be terminated. Turner syndrome is a chromosomal birth defect in females that drastically reduces the potential quality of life. For one, skeletal abnormalities, the most common being short stature, are a given. For another, learning and developmental disabilities are possible. Thirdly, heart abnormalities are the major cause of premature death of those with Turner syndrome. Lastly, the daughter born with Turner syndrome would be lucky to have kids, but would almost certainly be infertile. This is all assuming the child would survive birth. The birth survival rate for girls with Turner syndrome is 1%. The girl's parents were, of course, shocked and concerned by this news, but went ahead with the pregnancy anyway. In the end, a baby girl was born. As the parents were warned, the daughter was declared a dwarf, dyslexic, and infertile by the age of 6. She underwent a hysterectomy upon discovering that she had a cancerous ovary. She wasn't yet 10. It is typical for this surgery to include the removal of all reproductive organs in the case of Turner syndrome under the motto, "Better safe than sorry." However, the doctor who performed her surgery left the remaining non-cancerous ovary and uterus alone because he had hoped that the science someday would help the girl regain fertility. Over the years, classmates and family members would mock her for her stature. She was told on multiple occasions that she would never amount to anything, and her best option would be to find a rich husband. Due to this, she coasted through her schooling, and her high school years came to an end with a subpar GPA. The guidance counselor, looking at her list of dream schools and her transcript side by side, burst into unintentional laughter. I'm going to pause the story here, because up to now, this story could apply to any female of short stature in this room. Some of you may be wondering if this story is mine. The answer to that is no, but also yes. I'm going to get into how I fit in later, but for now, consider. This girl was 6 years old and was told she would never have children. Her childhood was filled with hormonal therapy and discouragement from those around her. Even so, the rest of her story is happy. She didn't get into her dream school at first. Instead, she applied to a more reasonable school with an iron resolve to ace every class and transfer in the next 2 years. Determined, stubborn, and strong, she succeeded such that she graduated from her preferred university, Wittenberg College, which is now Wittenberg University, with honors and a degree in primary education. Some years later, with a steady job and her head held high, Julie walked into a tavern to meet some girlfriends. Here is where I'd like to transition into the second story, one of a boy named David. He was also the youngest sibling, but unplanned. He was told as much by his mother when he was 6. When his father came home from work a few days later, David didn't even recognize him. The father walked through the door, and David turned to his mother and said, "Who's this man entering our house?" This is because David's father was a salesman and he wasn't home often. David's lack of recognition triggered a major change. The father went to seminary to become a Methodist priest and stayed closer to home. Let's fast forward to high school, where David was a football player and a track star. Halfway through his sophomore year, his father announced that they would be moving from the city of Cincinnati to the small agrarian town of Xenia. Xenia means hospitality in ancient Greek and is associated with the practice of treating all strangers and foreigners with respect and compassion, because what if that stranger is a god in disguise? This name here is ironic. David was considered an outcast for a few reasons. One of them was he's the preacher's kid. Second, he listened to this weird thing called heavy metal, and most considered this devil music. And by most, I mean the principal who gave him detention for listening to Ozzy Osbourne on the way to school. Another last thing was he used words that most students hadn't bothered learning at Xenia. One example of this is when the math teacher handed back tests. One of the students had the misfortune to complain about his grade at the wrong time, and David's comment was this: "Uh-oh, the defecation is going to hit the rotating orifice." The expression he was trying to avoid, pardon my French, was, "the shit's gonna hit the fan." His teacher snorted once, resumed a grave stance as he turned back to the board, and sent David to the principal's office while the students gaped at this weird student as if he'd spoken a different language. After high school, his mother told him that she didn't want him to go too far away for college and that he would be going to Ohio Wesleyan. Newsflash, David didn't want to go. But it was the only way he would get a college education and paid for, so he went. After a year, he flunked out due to a lack of interest and excessive drinking. After that, he joined the Army. David's time in the Army included his first marriage. When he expressed his intentions to leave the Army later, his wife wanted him to stay and take a mission to Korea. He found out pretty quickly that that was because she wanted him away on tour while she had an extramarital relationship. The divorce was quick but painful. After that, David was honorably discharged from the Army. His life after the military was a series of jobs and stray college courses. At one point, he transported horses from different farms intending to breed. One day after work, he went into a tavern to nurse a beer, or 5. In walked a small blonde woman. She headed towards him and asked, "Is the seat taken?" "It's all yours," he said with a smile. "Thanks." She grinned, took the chair, and went to another table with another group of women. After a beer had been finished, he had the courage to go up and introduce himself. 2 years later, they were married. About 3 years after that, the couple wanted children. Luckily, it was 1994, and science had found a way to help Julie have children. Months after daily shots, doctor's appointments, and prayers, Julie came home with the news that she was pregnant. On December 29th, 1995, Julie had an appointment to check on the baby. The doctor's shocked and scared expression made Julie very nervous. It was explained to her on the way to the hospital. The baby's heart rate and blood pressure was declining really rapidly, and Julie's was starting to do that too. And an emergency cesarean section needed to be performed immediately. At 3:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, a baby girl was born. Julie and David named her Megan, and she is now at Elon University, telling her parents' story. I am considered a young adult. There are times when I feel that my limited life experience compared to others means that I'm not strong enough, I'm not resilient enough to conquer challenges. That's a lie. I am standing here sharing my parents' experiences because those two stories that became one made me. A friend, Monique, said this when I was working on this speech. Newman Lumen is more powerful than a lecture. Resilience comes from inspiration. This is a space for storytelling, for sharing our experiences to teach, inspire, and ultimately empower each other. There is an adage stating that experience is the best teacher. It's one of my personal favorites, but I'd like to propose an addendum here. The experience from which you learn does not have to be yours. I challenge you, each and every one of you in this room to share your experiences and your stories. Storytelling builds resilience and makes everyone stronger in the face of adversity. It takes a village not only to raise a child, but to live. Thank you.